So today I'll be talking about the ENTP personality type, provided with the theory descriptions by Meged and Ovkorov. Then I will provide you with some examples of how to spot these kind of personality types. So we'll just dive in right away. So the ENTP extroverted intuition subtype, just to go through the quick details, I'm not going to go through the fat, you guys can just look over it when you would like to, but just as a quick overview, they present themselves as an impression of someone who's detached, floating in the clouds, childish, naive. They're very socially adept conversationalists, read much, and is inquisitive. You know, they like to discuss. They're often very smiley. They are kind in comparison to the other subtype, and their gestures and speech either seem slowed down or accelerated, and their pose seems either to be scattered or defocused, and their gait and movements lack certainty and firmness. So just as a quick summary of over this, so look, the key factors to look for that this subtype tends to be very inquisitive, conversationalist, they're very socially adept, so they know how to communicate with people and express their point of view in a very intellectual manner, I would say. But at the same time, they have like a naive, almost detached kind of approach to the world. So they seem out of this world almost, but not to the extreme, because they're able to socially provide you with their logic very elegantly and in a very inquisitive manner. With that said, they speak very quickly most of the time, and that's actually very something important I would point out. And with this in mind, their gestures, the way they move their hands, are fundamentally very scattered, so they can be very all over the place at times. But in quick summary, this is a very inquisitive type. That's probably the best word to describe them, but they're very kind. They can be scattered at the same time as well. Now for the introverted subtype, this subtype tends to give an impression of a serious person. They can be sharp and even inconsiderate, self-assured, speaks rapidly and even categorically. At times they appear assertive and self-confident, impatient, actively and vigorously defend their interests, may flare up, behavior is unpredictable and full of contrasts, gait and gestures are swinging, seem confident but poorly coordinated. So just to provide you with analysis of this subtype, notice that when you're looking for this type, notice they're very sharp and vigorous. That's probably one of the key words to look for, and it's vigorousness of expressing their rational approach. So while the other one tends to be more cool and obstinate in their expressing themselves to the world in a very detached manner, the introverted subtype tends to be very more assured and aggressive in a way almost, but they're also very intellectual and smart. So when they express themselves, notice that their ideas are very vigorous, and it's almost difficult to understand what they're saying, but they're very confident and they're very self-assured when expressing themselves, and with this in mind, they do present themselves in a very serious manner, but it's still very rational at the same time. So as a quick summary, when you're looking for the ENTP extrovert subtype, notice that they're very cool, obstinate, intellectual, inquisitively, while the introverted subtype tends to be more self-assured, vigorous, categorical, knows how to defend their interests, and they tend to have a more self-assured and serious approach to the world. They're just very serious. So now I'll leave you to the video examples, and I hope you guys see the pattern as well.
I think my life journey has been about learning to be brave and create opportunities for myself, and it's been, it's been a tough journey to get to this place. So I wanted to write a book for people like me that kind of explains my life methodology, which is something that I think that I really learned from Mythbusters, is a critical thinking life methodology, but I had been doing it my whole life, and that is, I use a scientific method to sort of frame how I tackle big problems. I call it Crash Test Girl because that's kind of my step in the scientific method of experimentation. Has always been crash testing, where I just dive in head first, because if I hesitate, I get too scared and I won't jump and I won't take opportunities. So I have to dive into big situations.
Operating on too little sleep here. There's a couple of questions that have been asked repeatedly, and I wanted to address them. One is, are there any myths we want to test that the producers won't let us? Well, given the fact that we are executive producers of our show, the answer to that is no. Discovery always wants us to test stuff that's spectacular, and in general, some of the most dangerous stuff we want to do is spectacular, and they've always been a great partner in helping us find some way to do it, the resources, the money, the time. So really, there's nothing giant on our list where we're like, oh, those dreaded producers won't let us do it.
For instance, in America, or Northern England, I suspect, in the Midlands, a lot of people lately, because this throws a lot of people together, they went to the grocery store and there was someone there wearing a different head covering. In American terms, it wasn't a baseball cap. Really good by me, but maybe odd for some people. Then they went to the men's room, and lately there seemed to be someone of a different gender at the stall next door. I happen to welcome that, LGBT rights, but that came very fast for a lot of people. Then they went to work, and somebody rolled up a robot next to them who seems to be studying their job. So if you think what anchors people in the world, where they live and where they work, and who they're associate with, there's been a lot of tumult in all of those areas as a result of these accelerations.
Right. Well, this was during the 90s. I had a job as the chief scientist of the engineering lab of Internet-2, and Internet-2 was the collaborative lab of most of the American research universities to study internet-related things. And my main project when I had that was this thing called teleimmersion, which is to try to make what you might call a fully realistic avatar or a version of a person of virtuality that looks like the person so that you simulate physical co-presence. There are two reasons we tried to do that. One was just for the bravura joy of it, to say, here we've really pushed virtuality to an extreme.
Don't even bother to sort of say, oh, I'm succeeding these people. Just be your own. In fact, I remember very distinctly, even during the interview process, this is for the board was conducting, they asked me, hey, do you want to be the CEO? And I said, only if you want me to be the CEO. And the feedback I got was, well, but people who want to be CEOs are like, I want to be CEO. I said, look, that's not me. And I remember going and talking to Steve, and he says, yeah, just be yourself. It's too late to change. Dad, in fact, I remember one of the big decisions that changed my life was, my entire outlook was so provincial when I look back at it, which is, hey, I want to stay in Hyderabad, maybe study economics and political science and work for a bank. That was about the extent of my ambition. And he looks at...
Well, yes, I remember that very vividly because, you see, I'm a theoretical physicist, and I work with the theories of Einstein and the quantum theory. And so to be before a television camera is a new experience. But when the 3 Mile Island accident happened, all the media was saying, we need a scientist. We need a scientist who can help to decipher this mess to the American people. So they contacted me. And so I said to myself, well, this is what I do for a living. I'm a physicist. And so I said to myself, okay, I'll get on national television, get on national radio, because the situation demands it.
The podcast episode is what happens to her? What does it mean to be the first outsider? So in a certain sense, she's the Jackie Robinson of painting. But there's many ways. Jackie Robinson is a particular trajectory. I call that the pioneer trajectory. He opens the door, and within, a couple of years, there are dozens of African-American ball players in the major leagues. So the pioneer is the person who breaks down the barriers. But there's another phenomenon, which is the one I'm exploring in this story, which is the token. And the token is you open the door for one person, and then you close it behind them. And you say to the world, look, I opened the door to the one outsider. You can't, no one can fault my generosity.
The States found itself in an historically unique position with no great power rivals. It was completely secure and bestrode the world like a colossus, which meant that it had a very wide choice of the foreign policies that it could carry out. And what it chose to do, in a number of instances that I detail in the book, is what we wrongly call, or misleadingly call, nation building, but is really two closely related things. One is nation building, creating a sense of community among disparate peoples, and the other is state building.
On what? So what I've called myself is sometimes Trump. Okay, people have said there's never Trump and then there's always Trump. Sometimes Trump meaning that when he does something that I like, I cheer, and when he does something that I hate, which happens, then I boo. And I'm booing as loudly as you are when he does something that's really bad. But listen, you're very upset about this Supreme Court nominee. I am very pleased about this Supreme Court nominee as a conservative, right? He's doing a lot of things that I like in terms of policy. Now, that doesn't mean that I am cheering his character, because I think that it is very difficult to cheer Donald Trump's character, nor do I think it's appropriate.
Well, what do you like?
Okay, so I like the tax cuts. I like
You
the
like the
movement to-
tax cuts?
Mhm.
Yeah,
It hurts me, by the way, in California, but I like it as a general policy. Republicans who have suddenly become fans of Vladimir Putin or have suddenly become fans of tariffs. I think all of that is idiocy. But again, I think that with regard to judges, with regard to taxes, with regard to Middle Eastern policy, particularly Iran and Israel, I'm much more of a fan of President Trump than I certainly would have been of Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. And by the way, I didn't vote for President Trump in the last election because of my concerns about him.
Somebody enters a store and asks there, is it that you still don't have butter? And the person there answers, sorry, you're the wrong store. We are the store which doesn't have oil. The store which doesn't have butter is across the street there, you know. Like this is, and again, I could give, I think that even
Ja, aber was ist jetzt genau übertragen auf den Alltag? Sie haben ja gesagt, ich soll da in das Erziehungslager gehen. Was lerne ich da bezüglich den Alltag?
I will refer to philosophical everyday, or sorry, ideological everyday. That's, I think, one of the ways, but I don't have time to explain it now, it will take too long time, how ideology cheats. It offers you coffee, and it implies that it's coffee without milk, but it's really coffee without cream. That's like, in this background, what is missing, but it's there, it's crucial. Let me give you...
He's a very nice guy and you know, good sport about it, but he does Fox News most of his time. And if he does do other cable news channels, it's the same problem everywhere. Unfortunately, interviewers on US television tend to have limited time, limited resources, and just want to keep moving things along. And when I interview people, I try not to move along. I don't want to move on. I want to stick to it and try and get an answer. That's my job. The clip, which you don't see if you watch the interview, he actually says to me at the end, he goes, let's just move on. Ask me another question. I'm not going to do that. And the problem is, look, most people would move on because it's uneasy. It's not easy to go up and just keep asking someone the same question. It's not. I don't like doing it. You have to relentlessly keep asking the same question, keep asking for answers, not moving on, getting in people's face. That's rude, right? Seth, you don't want to be rude to your guests.
Of course not.
It's socially awkward, and we're taught not to be like that. Although I'm British, I'm rude and socially awkward to begin with. So
you have some people who say, what do we have to do with human rights? What is democracy for? Is not liberalism too complicated? For sure, this tendency exists. And we are now in a time where all these values which shape a decent civilization are at stake. But it is not a reason to resign and to submit. It is a reason to try to glorify and illustrate them.
We need real competition in this field. And there's a problem. So Amazon, Google, they own a platform, which is pretty cool, right? Where everybody comes to buy and sell or to do the searches. And at the same time, they own a bunch of businesses that are competing with all those folks who are coming, say, to Amazon in order to sell their goods. And they don't just compete straight up. They compete by being able to keep all of the information from every one of those companies and then decide, oh, I'm going after you, and I know how much to charge, and I know what kind of volume to expect. You know, it's a little, excuse me, it's a little like being an umpire in baseball and owning a team.
System. How can, if I vote for an illegal war, why would I be a good defender of your First Amendment rights or your Second Amendment rights or any part of the Constitution? And we, unfortunately, are delivering to this new generation a system of government where there's very little respect for the Constitution. And, you know, we have the executive branch abusing it constantly. You can't depend on the judicial branch, and you certainly can't depend on the Congress to protect our liberties.
Communism versus capitalism. So we went into Vietnam thinking we are going to get rid of this terrible communist specter, you know, the domino theory. And
right, and the domino theory was the
if
idea
Vietnam
that
falls, all of it might go communist, and paying very little attention to the sort of specific cultural context, the national context. So by now, Vietnam is my favorite case because a lot of people are fascinated by, you know, people think that they know a little bit about Vietnam. It's pretty common knowledge now that we underestimated the role of nationalism. That is how much Ho Chi Minh, that is the president of the North Vietnam Communists, was actually not necessarily fighting for Marxism, but really for independence, right? They had...
Tell me if this is interesting or not. So anytime you have decision-making process in an organization, you have to have some mechanism. So a lot of places have hierarchy, right? The person higher up the chain makes decisions and then get filtered out. Problem with that is it assumes that data is flowing efficiently in the organization, especially when you're doing invention rather than doing command and control kinds of organizations. The information to make good decisions is actually relatively local. It's distributed throughout your organization. So you actually want to push decision-making as far out into the leaves as possible.
First software company in the industry. And I think he built the first software company before anybody really in our industry knew what a software company was, except for these guys. And that was huge. That was really huge. And the business model that they ended up pursuing turned out to be the one that worked really well, for the industry. So I think, but the biggest thing was Bill was really focused on software before almost anybody else had a clue that it was really the software. That's what I see. I mean, a lot of other things you could say, but that's the high order bit. And I think building a company is really hard.